This episode of the .NET Core podcast is brought to you in part by RJJ Software. RJJ Software is dedicated to helping you realize your company's digital potential through innovative solutions using the latest technologies. Utilizing the latest in .NET and cloud technologies, we can help you build the solution your business needs on time and under budget. We have world-class experience in cross-platform development using the latest iterations of the Microsoft technology stack. This includes .NET Core, SQL Server, and Azure. Is Azure not your thing? That's fine, because we have experience in AWS, GCP, Linode, and DigitalOcean too. We know what it means to have to be able to iterate quickly and how important DevOps practices are when it comes to remaining agile. As such, we have experts in the major build and release pipelines, from Azure DevOps to AWS, from Netlify to Travis CI, AppVeyor, and everything in between. So get in touch today at rjj-software.co.uk or check the show notes for a link. Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast. The only podcast which is devoted to .NET Core, ASP.NET Core, EF Core, SignalR, and not forgetting the .NET Core community itself. I am your host, Jamie Gabrachman-Taylor, and this is episode 69, The Risks of Third-Party Code with Niels Tanis. In this episode, I talked with Niels about exactly what are some of the risks with adding NuGet packages without checking them out first, and what you can do to ensure that the third-party code that you include in your applications is exactly what it says it is and is safe to use. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So thank you ever so much, Niels, for taking some time today. I really appreciate it. We're all busy people, right? Regardless of, so I don't like to talk about the current situation at the time of recording, but regardless of the current situation, even if it was not the current situation, we'd all be pretty busy anyway. So I really appreciate you taking some time out of your morning to come and talk to me about this very important topic.
Thanks for inviting me, Jamie. It's good to be here for sure. Good morning.
Excellent. Okay. I was wondering, for the folks who maybe are tuning in and are not sure about your background and, you know, the career path that you've taken and things like that, could you perhaps introduce yourself so that everyone knows a little bit more about Niels as we go in?
Yeah, it sounds like a good plan to start out first introducing yourself, right? So, so I'm Niels Tanis. I work as a security researcher for Veracode, which means in my daily job, I'm mostly focused on application security and our static analysis. That's the service that we offer. I'm a remote employee based in the Netherlands. And what I'm started out when I started out my career, I first started out developing software, and I've written a lot of .NET since the early bits, like the 1.0 bits. And I always kept application security on the sidetrack. And after some moves within companies, I moved into the AppSec space fully, and I was an ethical hacker for a year where I mostly focused on breaking systems. But then I realized that building good software, building quality systems is a lot harder, and breaking is a lot of fun, don't get me wrong. But I decided to move back, and then I was able to jump on the company that I'm working on right now, or like the company I'm working for right now, and combining everything that I'm doing. So that's like breaking and building combined, and I think that's the strength that we need within the application security space. And I also do a lot of talks, public speaking. I enjoy that a lot. And my goal is just to make sure that developers are aware of the stuff that they're doing when they're writing their software, when they're doing stuff with external libraries. I think we're going to touch today, hopefully, and make sure that everybody gets their software in a better shape, so we get into a better space overall, right? I think that's the goal I have. So, that's it in a nutshell. And, it's good. As I said, it's good to be here. It's good to talk about stuff and, talk about application security for sure.
I think that's the most important thing, right? Because, I talk about, when I'm talking to some folks who are not developers, you know, I say, when it comes to app security, you can't build a house without the foundations, right? And the security has to be the foundations. You know, you think about if you walk into a building and they have those card readers, right? I've seen this, one of the places where I used to work, they have like card readers at the door and you have to put your card and be authenticated before you can walk in, right? The problem was this place where I used to work had a door and a card reader and the walls around it were plain glass.
Okay.
So if I want to break in, I'm not saying I wanted to break in. If I wanted to break in, they just smash the glass, right? I don't need a card to get into the room. And then on top of that, right, the ceiling was made of those ceiling tiles. You could just poke up,
push up,
and there's a walk space. So I'm like, there's no security here, you know?
That sounds like a bad risk assessment, right? That's always what needs to happen. Like, what do you want to achieve by doing that?
Yeah.
And it looks like something they added later on. That's how it sounds to me. And that's a thing, right? If we talk about security and application security in general, then if you bolt it on later on, then it usually ends up in being a problem for your software. You need to think out up front. And as you said, like structuring of buildings and the building should not collapse, right? If I restructure my house and I need to change something in a wall that's also holding up my roof, then I need to have all the regulation in the Netherlands. At least I need to have some paperwork to prove that I'm getting somebody that knows exactly what it's doing. You need to do some calculations in order to reduce the risk, right? And similar things happen with software. And I think that's something that people need to be aware of. Like, it starts out with a small piece of software. And what we usually always like mention within customer conversations we have from the company that I work for is that every company will end up being a software company, and it will become their essential parts of running their business. And I always, like, if I'm talking to like friends who will run a company, he has a web shop and he had some database stuff that he wrote himself, and I went through it together with him, and I said like, hey, what happens if I'm able to drop all this data that's inside? Because there was a SQL injection problem in it, and I just pointed it out to him. I wanted to help him. He says like, then I've got a problem. I said like, yeah, so that's a big risk for you if you lose all your data, right? And I think as long as people are aware of that, and there's always a gradation of what you want to achieve and what you're able to achieve. Depends on the company that you're working for. Like what's the industry? If it's a one-person shop, it will be different than if it's a big bank that has like a lot of developers and maybe even 20 people that run application security, right? That's a different story than that guy that just runs his own online store because he's passionate about selling specific things. He's like a sneaker. He likes to have nice sneakers to sell. That's different, right? So I think it's important to be aware of the risks that you're facing in the context that you're working with, right? And that you can mature. And it's always people always ask me like, hey, but I need to make sure that I'm fully secure. And that's also not how it works. You want to reduce the risks, right? You want to make sure that it's enough to keep the bad guys out and to keep it operational, to keep it workable. Usually, highly secured systems are not the easiest to work with. And that's the flip side of that. So, yeah, as you said, it's important to have some idea of what you want to achieve. If you would put the analog in of buildings and how they are built, even with the space like within software, the industry in general, there's not much legislation happening, right? We do see if a data breach occurs, right? In the UK, some big companies have got like a lot of millions fined to them because they lost their customer data. That's the first step, right? To get people on the same boat. There's still a lot to improve. I'm not saying that it's a bad space right now, but we will get there as long as everybody just takes small steps and do the best they can in their context. That will help out for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of points that I want to sort of raise there because there's some really interesting points you raised. So I guess one of them is there is no full security. There's just a little bit, I don't want to reduce it, but more secure than everyone else. And I'm a metaphor person, right? There's another podcast. There's another podcast I do called Tabs and Spaces, and I always use examples on that. And the example that I use when I'm talking about security is imagine you have on street parking, right? There's maybe 5 cars parked at the side of the street. One car has it's locked, right? All the cars are locked. One car has a wheel clamp and one of those steering wheel locks and a car alarm. The next car has just a wheel clamp. The next car has just one of those steering wheel locks. And the other 2 cars don't have any other locks other than the standard locks built into the car. If I'm a crook and I want to steal a car, Am I going to waste my time on the incredibly secure cars, or am I just going to smash a window of one of the locked cars, jimmy it, and drive off? That's the whole point. You have to be as secure as everyone else, but a little bit more, so that then you're less attractive, I guess, to the sort of standard.
Yeah, it's similar to burglars with your house, right? Always make sure that your house is more secure than the one of the neighbors, and then you won't have got an issue, right? That's exactly the same analogy, for sure. Yeah.
Sure. And you talked about how every company becomes a software company. You want proof of that? Go look at Amazon, right? Amazon started out as a retailer, an online retailer for books. You had to call and give your credit card number over the phone. And now they run like 50% of the internet infrastructure or something stupid like that, right? Netflix requires them to run, They have become a software company through selling books. So it doesn't matter where you start. Like you say, you are going to be a software company. Even if you're not selling it, you are going to be using it to drive your sales, to make your money. So it's important. It's imperative to get it right from the start, I guess.
For sure. Yes, definitely.
And I guess from my point of view, some security is better than no security, in the same way that some tests are better than no tests. Is that a good place to start, I guess?
As I said, I think what usually happens right now, what you see, if you have a company that has maybe legislations to like adhere to, like maybe financially, like financial industry, like banks or something else, you want to make sure that your posture from security perspective in relation to all the applications you have will be something that evolves and that grows, right? That improves, that adapts to the stuff that's happening, and that will get you into a better shape. And then I would agree, if you take small steps, and that start out, like if you look at coding stuff, dynamic SQL statements, right? SQL injection, that's what's happening. If you're like concatenating just input data that comes from an external source into your SQL statement, then you can do that, drop tables, and then get rid of all the data that's in the database underneath. And if you stop saying like, hey, I just always do parameterized queries, unless there is really a need to do stuff, and then you need to maybe take another approach and make sure that the data is properly vetted, but still like make sure that you've got some good steps, and also have some basic guidelines where you like the stuff you always work. It would be similar if you're doing like software. I'm pretty confident that if you start out doing a new project, you usually have a scaffolding project, like how it works. Like this is I'm going to separate it into these layers. It's going to be a project that does this, right? And I would say like security just needs to be tied in from the beginning. And hopefully you take on the stuff that you've learned in the past and apply it on the new project, right? That's at least what I'm doing. And aside from the fact that I'm lazy and I don't want to repeat myself, that's a good thing. And then I would say, yes, small steps is definitely better than doing nothing. And make sure that you keep an eye on what's happening, similar to new stuff that's like being found, but also the fact that the software that we write nowadays has evolved over time. Like when I started out my own development career, I used to say like I wrote the big monoliths that was installed at the customer, which I literally just gave the installer to, like, hey, this is a thing you need to install on those two servers on your infrastructure. And then you get, compared to what we're doing right now in relation to the AWS example you gave, you just smudge the whole application landscape on AWS or maybe Azure or Google Cloud, and the software runs, but there's a lot of moving parts. And also the way that the software will be developed, deployed, and tested has gotten a lot more complex, which also introduces a lot more risks on the supply chain in general, but also, and one step of it would also be like, hey, you pull in third-party libraries, right? And you build on top of something that's already created. And I think that's definitely a good thing, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel. But be aware that there's no such thing as a free puppy. That's also an analogy you hear a lot. But you pull in a library, you're going to use it. You need to take care of it. You need to keep an eye out. Stuff that's being updated, published vulnerabilities, which will happen later on. But what about the simple question, like if you look back at the projects that you have maybe released with customers or installed, like are you able to say which library was used on all those different projects, right? I think that's the first step, having some visibility of, hey, I've used version X of of Dapper because I do some data access mapping in that. And right now it turns out that there needs to be an update for that. It would be good to be aware of exactly like, hey, that's a system that runs publicly connected to the internet. That's a high priority for me. That's one we need to probably fix more quickly than the one that's being run on a backend server that has 2 end users, right? That's the different gradation on how you need to approach that, I think. But so that was a lot of information. But yeah, so I think if you look at continuously growing the ability of doing the right things in application security, then yeah, we should just learn. It needs to be integrated and be aware of the risks that you're facing. And if we then maybe pivot to the third-party libraries again, if you would analyze, there are some tools you can run against your code base. There's also an ability to maybe do on GitHub. It even has Dependabot that will do a lot of stuff for you, which I think is a really good thing. Doesn't necessarily mean that you are facing risk because maybe you're not using parts of that library that have got like problems. It would always be a good idea to update them if possible, but I think it's always a good thing to consider, like, hey, is it a necessity? Can I maybe, like, do I need to do it right now because it's that publicly facing system? Or can it wait till the next cycle because it will only get us out of the moment of having this sprint and we're releasing a big chunk of functionality, which is also important to us, right? And that's the call off, and that's the judgment you need to make as a developer. And there's a lot. And similar with application security, if you're lucky to run within an organization that has got its own application security team that focuses on doing static analysis, focuses maybe on forcing teams to do threat modeling, that will be, of course, different than that one-person shop that does it all on its own, right? That's the big skew, and you cannot expect a one-person shop to do exactly the same as Microsoft, who's got like hundreds of security engineers to solve a problem. And I think that's the big key difference between that. And same counts if I maybe want to just like point out to third-party libraries. Usually they're being built by people in their spare time because they have solved the problem and they want to share it. But it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will be able to invest the same amount of time in maintaining it and fixing problems, right? And so that's the trade-off. Yes, you will get stuff for free. You need to be aware of the fact that so stuff gets fixed. There are updates, and I think that's the key importance of third-party risk and some of the problem spaces. And we need to get a better hang of with using the right tools and growing in that space, right?
Sure. I feel like over the past maybe 10, 15 years, there's been this push towards DevOps, and I feel like security needs to be included in there as well. I've heard this acronym for the past couple of years, DevSecOps, this idea of, including security in that immediate, that sort of feedback loop. And I think that that's really important. I think the couple of things that you mentioned there about which versions of what have I used in which project and where are they? I think that's really quite important. Like, I'm going to pick a library out of the air, right? Let's say, because I'm a .NET dev, I'm going to talk about Newtonsoft JSON. I'm not saying that there's any security issues with it, but let's say I'm using version 11 in a project for one customer and version 12 in a project for a different customer. When version 13 comes out, I may need to go, right, what are the differences and what security issues have been solved? I think you're right there. I think it's important to have someone on the team, even if you're a single person team who knows which libraries, who has done this audit and said, version 12 of this was used for this version of the application or whatever. Version 13 is out and there's a security fix. Right. I'd better create maybe a branch or a spike, install the newest version and see what the differences are. Because it's not just a case of download the latest version and see what happens. Because it may break things. It may cause other security instabilities. There needs to be a full investigation, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that's the trade-off. And I think there's a really good tool that people can start out using that allows them to dump a dependency graph, including transitive dependencies for a lot of technology stacks. And one of them is also, of course, .NET. And it's called Cyclone DX. It's even a .NET CLI tool. that will do that. That will produce I think it does JSON XML format, depending on what you want to like ingest and process. But it gives you that visibility. And if everybody produces that file and shares that and puts that in with the release, life would be a lot easier. And I know that there's like, if you're a big company, you might have got like a repository that our developers are like forced to use because of like vetted components being in there, and that's like the baseline they want to work with, right? But that's not going to help out that a 1 or 2 person shop that wants to do the same. And then I think those files, it's something that's like related to the supply chain. They call it software bill of materials, that allows you to describe the software that you've created. And one of the key elements would be like having a dependency graph and having some knowledge of exactly like, hey, version 12 of NewtonSoft.json is inside that project that we need to go to 13. And as you said, then you need to do the diligence, like go through and see like, hey, what's the impact? It's a major version, right? Compared to maybe a minor. If the project makes a properly distinction between that. And then you need to decide what's the best step to take. So like what are the next steps to take in order to do that update. So yeah, that's definitely different. And if like the NewtonSoft.json, right, that's always the number one on NuGet, right? I'm not sure if it's still the case. The last time I looked, that was like still number one downloads. Can you imagine if somebody compromises that package and infects it, right? And that's like, it's third party risks also, but supply chain, right? The package itself has his own software development process tied to it. And we've seen in the past also with NPM packages that really low level packages got compromised. And one key example is something that happened to EventStream, which is a pretty minimal package within the NPM space. Minimal functionality, really small. And somebody was able to compromise it. And I think it's like, you're talking about millions of downloads a week. That's quite an audience to get. And if you're like bad intentions, that's a lot of compute you've got at your disposal if everybody starts using your library, and you can do some bad stuff. I think the event stream was eventually targeting a specific Bitcoin wallet to steal the cryptocurrencies out of it, right? The keys. It was pretty sophisticated. There was not a well thought like target, but keep in mind, like as you said, like with the burglars and the cars analogy again, if there's money to make and if it's an easy one, then it's just a business model to the crooks, right? They want to get as much as possible within a short time window. They're lazy. And if it just means like, hey, I can compromise that package that has a lot of footprint within all of the software that gets used, then I think that's a big problem. And honestly, looking at NuGet, I'm curious if there's a really good way of seeing that kind of thing happening, right? NPM in general has got a really good tooling space of how you can do your audits yourself to see if there's packages that need your attention. And with NuGet and the .NET ecosystem, it's not there. So once every year we publish statistics, and .NET is one of them that's always a bit of the outsider if you look at the amount of public vulnerabilities that are inside. And my boss had a story last week where he told, like, hey, .NET is even the lowest to that degree because it's a pretty clean ecosystem compared to NPM, which already has been built up from the community, right? I think that's different. If you look at NuGet, it's being built up maybe from top down, and NPM is maybe built like from bottom up by community-driven stuff. And that's maybe the key difference. It doesn't mean that there's not an issue within .NET, because 80% of the apps that we see for the first time have a vulnerable component that needs to have some attention. But there's a big space, and as long as people are aware of the fact, like, hey, this is a package widely used by a lot of people, has a lot of attention, and it's being run by 1 or 2 people. Yeah, there's a skew, right? And then if you're using it, then it will be good to maybe contribute and help out if there's a problem. I think that's some kind of obligation we have, right? In order to make sure that we grow as a community and that we write better software that's more secure and less risk.
Sure. I think from my point of view, there's a couple of points there. And I'm not trying to say that one is better than the other, right? Because NuGet does things that NPM doesn't, and NPM does things that NuGet doesn't, right? And both have their benefits and drawbacks. I'm not trying to start any kind of flame war. I mean, yes, this is the .NET Core podcast, so I'm going to side slightly with NuGet, but I feel like a couple of things like JavaScript doesn't have a standard library, whereas .NET has this huge amount of standard code, right? You want some kind of generics, it's there. You want database access, it's there. You may want different database access, but it is there, right? There's all sorts of code there to let you do all sorts of things, whereas modern JavaScript requires you to pull in all of these libraries because the standard library doesn't exist. Maybe we should have a standard library. I don't know. Yeah. But then maybe that would make the JavaScript runtime slower. I'm not sure. And then I feel like the projects that I've worked on that have been entirely NPM based, through one reason or another, there's no like version number pinning. Like by default, if you do npm add or whatever it is, npm install package name, it will pull down the latest version. And if you look in your packages.json, it's not pinned to a specific version. It's this version or higher, or this version, or just like this major version .star. Any version after this can be installed, right? And whereas with .NET, at least the way that I work, I usually go, NuGet install or .NET add package, and then a specific explicit version number. And I feel like that's one of the key differences in that I've always felt like the NuGet packages are pinned to that specific version, whereas npm by default. Now, obviously, there'll be a switch inside of npm install, or it's almost trivial to go, okay, open my packages.json and lock it down to this particular version, or is it packages.lock.json? That can help too. But it's like an afterthought, something you have to do afterwards. And I feel like that's probably one of the reasons why NuGet is a little bit, I don't want to say more secure, but a little bit less
prone to these kinds of issues, right? Because the default gives you a better path to walk. I think that's the key thing. As I said, if you look at NPM and the audit capabilities that are inside, that's something that we miss out on NuGet. But right now, there are some designs still open, and there is stuff being worked on right now by Microsoft teams on getting similar functionalities of being able to edit, audit your NuGet graph and audit the packages that you have inside your project and see if there's any updates needed. It has been a project that started, I think, even a couple of years ago. And the last thing I saw on the issue when I checked it last week to prepare for this, I thought hey, they said they're pretty close on wrapping it up, so it might be part of .NET 5. Who knows? But it will be good, and that means that it has that vulnerable CVE numbers type of information inside, and it allows everybody just to take the .NET CLI and to audit their dependency graph and to see hey, there is a vulnerable component inside your graph. Make sure you take the next steps or allocate work that needs to be done in the near future, right? So that I think that's a good thing. But as you said, if a system is more fine-grained and if there's more packages needed and there's no base class functionality available, that's one of the risks. And if you then one example I also gave, if you look at VS Code, which is based on top of Electron, and if you then look at the NPM graph and the dependency graph, including the transitive ones, you get, if you're using Electron, it's scary to see the graph in your system. And then you see the amount of people that touch those packages, which are the maintainers. I think it was 130 packages and a couple of hundred maintainers. But that doesn't mean that's all the contributors that are helping out developing it, right? So there's a lot of people, don't get me wrong, probably good intentions, but there only needs to be one inside that chain that can literally just screw it up for everybody, right? And that's not a risk that I want to maybe point out hey, everybody needs to be aware of it, but it's definitely a problem within that whole type of system. And if it works like that, and because apps do consist of a big portion of those libraries, right? That also results in your app possibly being vulnerable. So I think that's the key thing. And I was a bit amazed. So that there's a really you can see the graph and VS Code runs on an Electron, right? Then even VS Code itself has got its own extension-based system. There was some stuff happening with the Python extension. So don't get me wrong, I love VS Code. I use it all the time because it's my one, the first thing I will go to if I need to write some software. And the fact that you can just grab an extension And if I need to do some PLSQL things to investigate, then I could just grab the extension and it will just work for me. But there is a downside to that, like having such a vibrant ecosystem. It also becomes target for people, and they say like, hey, if there is something to gain there, then they will focus on that. So a lot of moving parts, and I think being more fine-grained, NPM definitely has got like a problem because you need to pull in a lot in order to start out, right? Compared to starting out with the new .NET Core project, which of course is more because it's more curated by the Microsoft teams itself, right? That makes sense. And it's being built up from that way. That helps out for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, we've talked a few times. I mean, you've brought it up yourself about doing audits and dependency graphs, and I know you talked about Cyclone DX earlier on.
Yeah.
But let's say I'm a one-person team, right? Or maybe I'm part of a huge team. It doesn't really matter how many people are on the team, and I'm building some software in whatever language, whatever framework, and I'm sitting there thinking, but what is the security of this thing? How is it best to start with a security audit or a dependency graph and then work from there? Or is there like, I know, I'll go tell the boss we need to do some testing and I'm going to get a security expert to come in and do it all for me? What's from your point of view? Now, obviously, I know that there's potentially a vested interest for you to say, hey, you should talk to Veracode. But what I mean is like, for, what's the starting point? Like we said earlier on, some security is better than no security. How do I go from, I don't know whether I have some security to I have some security?
I think the biggest, the key approach to take would first be to assess some of the risks that you're facing and maybe look into doing some threat modeling, and if you search for threat modeling in general, you'll probably get a lot of information like pointed to you need to do this and that. But why not just like create a component product diagram of your app, have all its architectural components inside, seeing data flowing that comes externally, that maybe goes to some backend system, that kind of thing, and maybe assess the risk down to that kind of thing, and then point out like, hey, what are the biggest risks that I'm facing? If this is a publicly connected system, okay, first step, hey, there's a web front end that will get all the traffic. So that will be the first one to jump into. So that will be the first thing, that just to have some guess, so some sense of like, what are the risks that I'm facing? Secondly, then investigate the technology stack that you're using. Make sure that you're doing best practices from that perspective. If there are some analyzer tools available, if you're doing .NET Core, there's a really rich set of Roslyn analyzers that can do a lot of for you, right, already out of the box. Maybe you're fortunate enough to have some commercial product available that does static analysis, right, with data flows tied to it, and maybe also do those dependency checks, right, and work your way down from that, similar to and then allow it to grow. Secondly, if you look at the developer space in general, if there is a bigger team of developers inside, maybe some learning and some education of knowing like, hey, these are the type of vulnerabilities you will create if you're maybe parsing an XML document, and if you have the DTD resolving enabled, for example, which luckily with .NET there's a good default, right? That helps out. So if you need to do something bad, between quotes, then that's an explicit API call. And but people need to be aware of like, these are the consequences, because if I can do external DTDs with XML, I can maybe even get data out of the system, or maybe execute stuff that I'm not like allowed to do. And that's the next step, right? So to get more awareness between the teams that are developing and allow it to grow from that perspective. Similar with bigger organizations, usually the application security team, like the amount of people that do it is usually really a small team. And what we do ourselves within our product security, right? Because we run software, we run AWS, we write software ourselves. Two of my colleagues within the team are mostly focused on product security, but our development teams is a lot bigger. I think like 100 plus people. So you want them to have the resources available to do the best job that they can. We work with a concept called security champs that allows them to, like, people who are more savvy, more security aware, that probably enjoy it, and they can help out team members on doing the right thing, right? That's usually the linking pin between the application security team, because it's really hard to scale that kind of practice within the organization. And but getting back to developing software, I think it would be good to have some baseline yourself. Like if you do software development, similar types of apps within the organization that all rely on similar backend systems that need those kinds of libraries, then why not have a baseline architecture that allows the security people to more easily see what's happening. It also allows them to say like, hey, if you're going for this architecture and you're going to develop it like this, then don't bother the security team because we're good with this, right? It will give you a lot of freedom. I'm a big fan of getting out of the way of developers and also give them the information that they need in order to not like program that vulnerability, but also give them the freedom just to write the software in the best way they can, because most of them are usually better than I am. So just allow that, right? And I think that that's also one of the key things to be aware of. If you're fortunate enough to have those kinds of resources available between the organization that you're working in, right? Or the people that you're working with. So I think that's always the good thing. I always get the question about like, hey, if I write this app, like what do I need to do a good job, right? And as I said, so awareness between developers themselves, knowing that like, hey, if you're doing this type of coding, that's a bad practice. Having maybe a baseline, and as I said, like I think it all starts with some kind of risk assessments to know exactly like what are the things that you're facing. Is it that app that's used internally by 5 people, or is it that app that will have a key in our business and will be publicly facing? And we'll get a lot of requests every hour in order to process data, right? I think that's the key difference between what to choose from. But as long as you take small steps and improve, that's the key, I think.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you that this episode is sponsored by Datadog. Also, stick around for the next 30 seconds to find out how you can get a free t-shirt. Datadog are a monitoring and analytics platform which monitor your infrastructure, application performance, and log management. Are you looking to move to the cloud, microservices, or .NET Core? Datadog can help with that. Their distributed tracing and APM provide end-to-end visibility into requests wherever they go, whether it's across hosts, containers, or service boundaries. See it for yourself. Start a 14-day trial today and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Find out more at datadoghq.com/.NET Core. That's datadoghq.com/DOTNETCORE, or check the show notes for a link. Sure, it feels very much like a case of yesterday I knew this much data, this much information about keeping my application secure, and tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe hopefully not a month, but after a certain amount of time, I know a little bit more, and I can sort of backport that to my practice and make my applications and the applications of the people around me more secure by recommending, hey, maybe you shouldn't do it this way, maybe you shouldn't do it that way. Oh, I saw that there was this security vulnerability reported and things like that. I think maybe that's a good, like you say, that's a good place to start, right? Start with small steps and build up, right?
Yeah. And also learn, right? If you know exactly like, hey, at this point, somebody tells me today, like, hey, Niels, if you're doing this with .NET, that's a big issue, then flip the switch yourself, go back to the previous things you've developed and see like, hey, I've done exactly the same thing there, right? And maybe we need to take care of it also. As I said, because you're like hopefully repeating the stuff that you've used before, right? Because that made you successful, that helped you out achieving the goals. But also do that flip back and also make sure that your team members know like, hey, this is a big problem. Maybe do some fun challenges around there, some educational systems. We've got one ourselves. There's a lot of others that you have got like capture the flag things that will also make it enjoyable for people to see what type of things happen. But it will then like hook them, right? They say like, hey, I won't make that mistake again. And don't get me wrong. Even when I'm writing software, there's always something like at some point like, hey, oh, this is not a good idea, Niels, because what you have just done will result in this. And this just happens, right? That's just how it works. But as long as you're aware of it, that's step one. And then improve on that. I think that's really important.
Sure. Okay. So let's say I've done my security audit. I've got my baseline application that I'm using somewhere else. Maybe I'm using a company-wide template and it's been approved by the security team. I've built my app. I've done my security audit. I've shipped it. Project has ended. Do I ever need to come back to it and go, I wonder how that's running? Or should I just go, no, until there's a reported problem? Because this is where like it could run into
Mm-hmm.
cost for, let's say I'm working on a short project for a client, right? I'm working as part of a team and we're building some software. And at the end of 3 months, 6 months, I've handed it over and project's done, right? Do I have to come back to that and say, this has just been flagged with this library? Let's say I'm doing something with RGB, right? I'm working in the RGB space. Some library that I've leveraged has some security issue. It's been fixed. 6 months ago, I wrote an application with the old version of it, right? And I gave that to the customer that I now know that's running in production somewhere on the web, right? And personally, right, this is my personal opinion, not the opinion of anyone else that's on the show or has been on the show. I'm not an employee of anyone related to .NET. My personal opinion would be I would need to reach out to that customer, that client, and say, hey, here's the detail, so you can look it up if you want to yourself. But I happen to know there's a security vulnerability in the application. Here's the information. So if you want to go to someone else to fix it, that's fine. But since I have knowledge of the system, I can fix it for you, but it might cost you a little bit of money, right? That's where it gets a bit hairy, right? I'm saying to them, there's a problem with your system. Pay me and I'll fix it.
Yeah. On the other hand, hopefully you've got a good relationship that like you've done the best you could at the time when you were writing the software, right? And as long as that kind of trust, then I would definitely encourage everybody to do exactly the same. And how hard will it be just to drop that message saying like, hey, this is inside. I know it's an issue. And feel free to reach out to me if you need any help, right? I think that's the key thing to do for sure.
Sure. But then I guess you can only do that so long as you have those security audits and dependency graphs. And I guess someone in the organization needs to be on some kind of mailing list to get information from the authors of those packages, right? And all of the dependencies. So let's say you are building something with, again, I'm not trying to pick on NPM, but let's say you're building something with NPM. You're using, I don't know, some platform system. Let's say Angular, right? I'm not saying Angular has any security vulnerabilities because I don't know. I've never done an audit, right? But Angular will likely have a massive security dependence, like a massive dependency graph, right? And somewhere down the line, it's probably using LeftPad or EventStream or my NPM package, right? It's using something somewhere that's going to get attacked. Mm-hmm. Now, I would assume, again, I'm not trying to pick on Angular, but I would assume that since Google is the main architect of that, it is open source, but since Google's the main architect, they're going to handle the security. But let's say something gets through, right? I need to know, as a developer who's using that technology, that at some point there was a security vulnerability and I need to fix it. So I've got to be on a mailing list, right? Or do I just keep hitting blogs and just go Angular news? Or what's
that's a hard problem to solve, right? If you would have kept track of, let's say, the dependency graph I just talked about, then that will be the first step. If you've got some sense of like what's inside that project at that point in time, that also can be a deliverable to the customer, right? Saying like, hey, this is it almost is like it's like a nutrition schedule on a box of food, right? Like this is inside. Look at this, and this may contain gluten. So if people are like allergic to gluten, they should not eat it. So this might contain this library, or this will use this library internally. So be aware of that, right? Yeah, that's a really that's a hard problem for sure, and I think it's not easy solvable. That's my conclusion. We should do the best we can, and maybe it's similar with if you would point out to software bill of materials in general, and both Microsoft and Google have pointed out like, hey, we need to do a better job as an industry in order to produce that, and I can already tell you like doing that dependency graph is definitely not enough, because how can you give your customers guarantee that the source that was in that source repo was eventually also the code that built that package that got deployed? And the steps that are done in between, how can you guarantee that what happened, that it exactly happened, and what happened? Is it properly tested? Did you do some code analysis? But is it that source? Is it that Git tag that was being put into the package, right? And then you get to the space also technical problems like reproducible builds, being able to take source code yourself and build it. That those are hard problems that we need to solve And I think with the .NET Core space, the reproducibility is definitely in, but it depends on your compiler, like what you have installed, what packages have you included, and then they will give you the guarantee that if the sequence, if it's all the same, then the sequence will be the same and it will have the same output. That's the first step. But I believe I think Mark Rusinovich mentioned that in his RSA talk on supply chains. That's definitely one to watch if you want to have a nice story about that. He thought I think with Windows, they got like two components that are they're able to build reproducibly. But I think as even within Linux, there are kernel modules that are they're not able to build them exactly the same as they are used right now. And that's a problem, because how can we then know for sure that the code that's inside that package or in that module or in that library that's used in that system hasn't been altered in a way that it has got some problems, right? That's definitely a real big problem space that we're not going to solve. But hopefully, if we're able to focus on software bill of materials and focus on supply chains and recognizing the fact that if you pull in that library, that becomes inherently a risk to your own application, because you're also pulling the supply chain behind that library. And if that gets compromised, then your application is compromised. But that doesn't still solve the problem about, as a contractor, delivering software to a customer and then say, hey, it's hands off, right? And then you need to do some hands off, including that information. I think that's the best you can do right now.
You mentioned there about reproducible builds, right? I'm going to play a little bit of buzzword bingo, right? Let's say you're building a microservices system that uses Docker for its runtime, right? You've got some series of Docker images, right? And they're all based on, let's say my Docker image for my .NET Core portion is based on Microsoft.NET Core, which is based on DB and Stretch, which is based on Alpine, which is based on. So there's a dependency graph for your runtime as well, not just for your code, right?
No,
so
it's even bigger than that. Yes.
Yeah, right. So then you go, okay, right, Docker run, and it goes, okay, give me a sec. I've got to pull the latest version of the Docker image, which was updated 30 seconds ago between now and when you last run it. Or it runs on your machine and you've got the a version of the Docker base image, and then 25 minutes goes by, you push it up for a CI build, and a change has been made to that Docker build image, which means it needs to pull that image in, and then everything breaks or some new vulnerability is found, right? Mm-hmm. That must be an even harder target to hit, because now not just the software that you've written and not just the libraries around it, but the platform it's running on is constantly changing, right? Or has the ability to constantly change.
Yeah. I think there's a bit of a flip you can make in this situation also. If you just assume that you're doing that layered approach of that Docker layers that will be pulled in, that implicitly also means that your security needs to be layered, right? So if you have a Docker image that will do some processing for you, that generates PDFs. That's one of the examples I've used in my third-party risk talks. And one of the problems that the library was introducing, and that was mostly based on the way that it was used, is that it was able to do web requests from that PDF library to get an image into a PDF, which is a trivial thing to do, and everybody does it, and that's just how it works. But that's a problem if we look at it from security side. It's something they call server-side request forgeries, which allows if I can put in data, then I can get that Docker image to do a web request on my behalf and maybe get metadata out of the system of the cloud vendor that it's running on, or maybe do calls to other backend systems that I'm not allowed to reach out. But because I'm in that Docker image, that's part of that cluster, that I'm able to access it, right? I think from that perspective, we talk about layers, and you need to lock down, why would a Docker image, if you don't want to have those images loaded externally, why would that Docker image need to have internet access or egress and being able to do that request outside? You will lock it down, right? And if you look at the library, the library exposes that functionality, maybe you want to limit that, and maybe you want to cut out some of the things. And I created a concept within .NET Core that allows you to do a load context, so which is a piece that will load all dependencies at some point. If you start out an app, then there's an assembly load context that will take care of assembly resolving, and it will get all the libraries that you need. And it's closely tied to what we used to know as something called an app domain. And with app domains, we could do some isolation, right? In the beginning of that .NET, there was something called code access security that allows you to do fine-grained access to a component. And that's a really strong concept, but it was too complex to use, and it wasn't used a lot. And ASP.NET has got something called medium trust. You might have been aware of it. Like if you lock it down, you cannot access temporary files. And in the shared hosting environment, it makes sense to lock down temporary files because otherwise I can use that to read files from other apps, right? You're not allowed to do that anymore. But with that load context, what I'm doing is that I'm stripping out types. And I'm just taking out the ability of a library to use HTTP client. That's exactly what I've done in my demos on this. And I think that's quite powerful. And what I'm seeing right now, even with .NET 5 and with Blazor, they're doing type stripping in order to reduce sizes, right? Because if you do a 5 megabyte download of a .NET app within the browser in order to run it on top of WebAssembly, that's of course a big burden. And that's of course only done once, but the first initial load will take long. And that's not what they want, right? So they will do some tree shaking and they will cut out types. And I think that concept is also really usable to patch libraries and use libraries as is, but then say like, hey, you're not allowed to do HTTP client because I don't want you to do that. And even if a developer then uses that library and says like, hey, putting in a URL, or he's not aware of it because it's just like a data element that he takes from the end user and just puts into that PDF component, then it will still be like locked down because the library doesn't allow that. And I think that's a powerful concept. And looking at other technologies like WebAssembly, and I don't know if you're aware of a concept called WASI, which is like a shared interface that they're creating right now because WebAssembly can run literally everywhere. They will have a similar type of access control on the WASI layer, on that API layer that allows you to say like, hey, this component cannot use this part of that base framework. And I think that's a really powerful concept. And unfortunately with .NET and code access security didn't work out, but maybe there are ways for us to do it. And as I said, like with my demos, I'm just stripping out types. That will be the first step. And you will have a load context that will be responsible for PDF generation. And you can still use it from your own app as is it was functionality that was close to your own DLLs that you're using. But it definitely has some minimizations on what it's able to do. And that's a layered approach, right? I'm not saying that everybody should use that. No, but it's the layered approach, similar to getting back to that Docker images or that Kubernetes cluster that runs all those images. You will always have a layered defense, hopefully. And if one layer fails, hopefully it's not a problem. If the second layer fails, then if the code is written in the right way, then it might still be safe, right? And hopefully then all the alarm bells go off within the production system and people can act on that, right? And then you get up back to like, hey, if I'm doing that, then I'm mature and I'm dealing with the problem in the right way. And yeah, you can definitely reduce risk if you're doing that, I think. So that's the opposite side. Just assume that you're like on a thing that might be compromised and work your way down from that.
Sure. Okay. My goodness, there's a lot of stuff involved. It's not a quick put a Band-Aid over it and everything will be fine, right? There's a lot of stuff involved, which is why I guess the security professionals are so sought after, right? And and I guess it's also why security is traditionally don't last, because it's like, no, we don't want to have to deal with all of those headaches. We don't have to deal with the platform changing and the libraries changing. We'll just wait until the last minute, do it then, right? That must be why it was traditionally done that way.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because if you then would correlate that back to the money it costs to fix it afterwards or to do it right from the straight out, starting out doing the right thing. That's of course also like a key difference than doing it at the end and then having that application security guy kicking the tires and say like, this is bad. And also the relationship between the development teams and the security team won't help out. Let's put it like that, right? Oh, there are those guys that will hold us back on not putting to production. And I think, like, as I said before, I'm a strong believer, like, facilitate, make sure that developers can take the right decisions from the start, and they just go on production when needed, and everything is a bliss. Like, and they might not even notice that there is an application security process that runs underneath it at all, and that will have those basic risks covered in the right way, right?
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we've talked about, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we've talked about. Hopefully we haven't scared anyone out of the business, right? We're just saying, hey, these are some things that you need to know about, because that's the way that I like this show to be. It's like, hey, here's this thing you've likely never really thought about. So it gives you something to go away and Google or Bing or search or whatever and go talk to someone about it and learn a little bit more, right? And I happen to know that some software houses have almost like an internal server, like a private feed of publicly available packages, right? Let's go with NuGet, right? I know of at least one company, one software house that has a private server on-prem or whatever, that only their employees and build servers can access, so that when they build the software, it does the NuGet restore or whatever, but it only pulls the specific vetted, audited packages, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than pulling them from the public source. Because, like we said earlier on, what if 12.1 and 12.2? What if some security issue is present in 12.2, but you're using 12.1? You do .NET Update or whatever it is, .NET restore. It's going to pull 12.2 unless you pin it specifically to 12.1. So is that a practice that you would recommend? Is that something that folks should maybe start with, rather than going, oh my goodness, the sky is falling, I don't know how to deal with this, there's way too many security issues, the platform's changing, the library's changing, my code is changing? Maybe start with one thing, like perhaps a private version of a public repo for your common libraries? Or is it more a case of, don't worry about that, that's the least of your problems, because here's the biggest problem?
Depends on the context and depends a bit on the risks. But I think in general, I would say it's definitely good to consider doing some curation in that area and say, like, hey, this is the baseline of packages. We've got our own build system. I even got questions like, hey, would you maybe fork the repo that's being used to build the package and do it yourself? If it's a high-profile app that contains a lot of risks for your organization, then it might make sense to have that strong, like, curated build of that component and make sure that you know exactly what's inside. On the other end, minor update, I would say just go with the flow, because it should not, like, hold you back in development, and then that depends. But I think if you start out looking at, like, maybe pinning to a version, saying like, hey, this is a version you should use. As you already pointed out, it doesn't necessarily mean that the whole dependency graph would be exactly the same, right? It's a trade-off. I don't think there's a good answer to that. It solely depends on the organization, but if there's a baseline you want to work with, then it makes sense to have a base library set that everybody uses, right? Because that's easy to curate, and there's no need to go over saying like, hey, we know exactly everybody's is on this version. We know that because that's something that we maintain with our own repo internally, and that makes it easier, right? For sure.
Sure. Okay. So let's say I have a small library. I've already looked it up on in the source code. I've gone to GitHub, GitLab, wherever it's hosted. It's maybe 4 files. And it's C#. I know that there is a build pipeline. I can see the build pipeline. Maybe there's a GitHub action and it produces a DLL, or a NuGet package, which is pushed up to NuGet. So I know that I can see when each build is pushed up. I can see the hash values that cause the build to happen. Is it worth me pulling the source code and doing a line-by-line security audit of, oh, I get what they're doing, maybe they should change this? Or is it a case of just pull the DLL, pull the NuGet package, make sure that it is that exact version that came from the build that happened in GitHub Actions or the CI/CD pipeline? What's the process for actually, in your opinion, for actually auditing a small? I'm not talking like a Newtonsoft JSON or any of the packages that make up the .NET Core runtime anymore. I'm talking like something that does a single action, right? We can talk about the same thing for NPM, I guess, like left pad, right? That has no dependencies, but it does one very specific thing. How do I go about auditing that? And do I pull the built version? Do I pull the source code and just sort of pull request all of the changes in, merge all the changes in? What's the process for a small package?
If it's such a minimal package, then you could choose to pull in those files and just have it part of your own product, and then you of course need to maintain it yourself. But as you said, if it's really simple and a small package, then I would still stick with getting that package from the source where it originates from, and maybe have some sense of what's inside, a look what's inside to a certain degree. And even if it's a bigger project or something else, I wrote a small tool myself that allows you to do an assembly dump of a .NET assembly, and it will point you out to all API calls that are done inside that library. And there's some like alphabetical ordering in, so it's a flat file. And if you do have a version X of a library, and if you do it from version Y, which is the next version of the library, you could easily compare and see like, hey, what type of API calls are there done inside this library? Is it something I should worry about? If it's all in the system space, and if it's just some basic stuff, then don't even bother looking into it in more detail, just accept the fact that it's there. If it's using API calls that do have concerns tied to it, which might be file manipulation, or if it has a binary formatter inside of it, then I would definitely scratch behind the ears and say like, hey, this is a package that needs more attention. And I would still maybe pull it from its original source, right? Just to have it more, like say, to have it there. And it also depends a bit on the risk profile I talked about before and how big the component is, because I totally see that it's not like you cannot ask a developer to do a full-fledged review of something. But I think it would be good to have some basic sense. And if there is a way of dumping that, which I've done, it's a tool called Fennec, which I created, which is on NuGet you can get. It really does that straightforward dump, and it allows you to compare it. And that would just give somebody the at least the urgency to look into something. And if there's a version, and if at some degree it gets in another library which makes no sense in the context, then alarm bells should ring off, right? So that you do like a more high over review of the library. And I don't think it doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be something you build yourself. And I think it just rely on the package manager to deliver the right stuff to you, but still have some sense of what's inside. And also as a developer, I think the least you need to do is, if you pull in a library, you need to have you pull in a library to achieve something, you need to have some good sense of what's inside and how it's used, right? And use it in the best way possible, not to introduce any risks. If there are any, maybe there's an API call you should not do. And if I then put the parallel back to .NET, that's the big thing I like about .NET Core and ASP.NET Core. The defaults are really strong, meaning that you can do bad stuff, but you will choose to do so, and you need to do it explicitly, which also makes it really easier for static analysis vendors like us to identify problems, but it will force developers to walk the right lane by default, right? And I think that's a really good thing.
Okay, I mean that makes sense, right? You have to know what's running inside of your application. I think that's one of the key takeaways that I'm taking away from this chat that we're having, is that I need to know what is running before I can worry about is this code secure. I need to know what the code is. And then not necessarily line by line, but maybe a high level overview of, like you said, that dependency graph, right? I need to know what my software relies on so that I know where to look for potential security vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Excellent. Yeah, because I do remember working on some projects where they're just like, don't worry, just pull this NuGet package in, or just pull this npm package. And I'm like, well, what's it do? Doesn't matter. Look, what I did, right? This one developer said to me, I was stuck with this problem, and I did a Google for npm package to do this. And I just literally npm installed the first one that I found, and it solved my problem. And I'm like, well, yeah, but what does it actually do? Well, I don't know. It solves the problem. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, the type of squatting in name packages, right? Look up my talk. I've got some examples about that, like how easy it is to pull something in, and it solves your problem, but you pull in a lot more. You need to be aware of, for sure.
Absolutely. So then, just sort of on our way to sort of wrapping up then, let's say I'm completely new to this whole thing, right? I don't know about security audits. I don't know about any of the stuff that we've talked about. I don't know about like our own sort of private npm repos or NuGet repos or whatever. if you were to take someone under your wing, like an apprentice, and say, these 5 things, go learn these 5 things, or go check out these 5 resources, and that will get you started. What would be the best place to start this journey of learning about making my applications more secure from a sort of pulling in third-party code point of view?
I think it's hard to tie to libraries in general, but then I still would say the education part I pointed out before, having some awareness of some basic security issues and how that relates to the way that you write your software. I think that's the key thing. That's the awareness step 1. He has the information he needs to do his job at that point, right? And also has a way to improve his skills or her skills in order to not introduce any of those problems. I think that's the key thing. And I think I'm a heavily believer of having some sense of what you pull in and why you're using it for, right? I think that's the biggest unseen problem. Like if you start out developing and there's a basic, let's say tutorial, if you look on docs.microsoft.com, you can start out developing literally everything, right? Make sure you've got some sense of like, hey, what's happening and why am I doing this? Or, I need to do this image manipulation and I need to pull in that library. Okay, so what do I get with that? Like, how does that then reflect my software? And I would definitely, if somebody starts out developing, as I said about the risk analysis type of thing, like making sure that you can draw a diagram of your app and identify some of the data flows, identify the components that are needed to order to store its data. Hey, it writes the disk queue. That's part of our internal infrastructure. There's some configuration management happening. It maybe needs to get some secrets because it's a Docker container that will have environment variables, which of course is a bad thing, but you need to maybe use a key vault in order to do that, right? Those best practices and point them out to do the right job starting out from that point and work your way through that, right? And still encourage everybody to use technology and use new technology. I'm a big fan of new technology. I think it should not hold people back on creating cool stuff, but always flip the switch now and then to make sure you are aware of, hey, this is cool stuff, but what are the implications? It's similar with the example of WebAssembly I gave. Like people are a bit scared, like, hey, WebAssembly inside your browser and running that kind of things. As I said, like the thoughts and the designs that are done behind it with the standards that's also done by people at Mozilla. I think it's really cool to see like, hey, they've thought about this, right? And there are people in the industry that worked with .NET also before that moved to WebAssembly, and they have some sense of like, these are good standards. This is a good model to work with. And there's always a trade-off between writing functional software and creating secure systems, right? Because the most secure system would be one you turn off and you dig a hole and then you put the system in, and then it's fully secure because nothing will happen unless there's water coming underneath, right? That's a different story. So be aware of the context of the app that you're writing and work your way out to that. And just, as I said, enjoy technology and build cool software. I think that's the key thing I would like to take away to people who start out.
Okay. I mean, that all makes sense, right? You got to have an awareness of what the problems are and not be afraid to try something new.
No,
but
exactly.
it all comes back to education, right? One of the things when I was at university, I did computer science at university, and the thing that they said to me was, we aren't going to teach you everything you need to know. That isn't meant to be that we're not going to teach you what you need to know. You're not going to learn it all from us. We need to set you up for lifelong learning. And a lot of people get into this business and like, I can be a programmer or a developer or a coder or whatever name you want, and I'll make loads of money and I'll never have to learn a thing again. And I'm like, you are getting into the wrong business. If you don't want to ever have to learn anything ever again, you are in the wrong business.
For sure.
Because it's like my friend James jokes, hey, we've been talking now for 30 seconds. That means that 4,000 new JavaScript libraries have been created and they're deprecated, right? And it's pretty
it never
much
stops,
that,
right? For sure.
Yeah, right. We're constantly moving forward, which is both a blessing and a curse. We get the new, shiny new amazingness, but also you need to take the moment to maybe think about, learn, study, and then reflect on what you've learnt, which is important, right? Excellent. Sure, okay. Sure. So what about keeping up with you then? If people want to learn about maybe the next time you're giving a talk or any interesting blog posts or video, I don't know whether you're a blog post writer or a video creator, but if you are doing these things, how do we find out about it?
So I do have a blog. which can be found at blog.fennec.dev. And it also has a list of speaking engagements that I've done, including videos and code snippets. I think that's a good starting point. One talk about the third-party risk if people want to see more about the assembly load context. That's what I'm pointing out there. And my GitHub repo has got every source example that I've used in the past, so that will be a good start. Yeah, and keep an eye out on my blog. I started that out beginning of this year with the intention of writing a lot, but you know how it goes. And maybe this isn't a good trigger for me to be more actively on that, because I've got some things, some stuff ready that I need to share about software supply chains, about the Roslyn code generators, source generators, which are pretty powerful also to do some security stuff with. So go to see my blog and my Twitter and start from there, I would say.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I mean, that's essentially all the questions that I have. We did veer off topic, a little bit of inside baseball talk. I do send around a document with, here are some of the things I'd like to touch on. And we veered off course like we normally do. And hopefully I didn't catch you too far off guard.
No, that's completely fine. No, that's fine. No worries.
Excellent. Well, fine. Yeah, thank you ever so much, Niels, for taking the time to chat with me today. I genuinely really appreciate anyone who comes on the show, but this is incredibly exciting to me because I'm always about tweaking my code to make it a little bit more secure. And there were a few things we talked about that I'm going to go do this afternoon and figure out how to implement into my normal daily practice. So cool. Thank you ever so much for that.
You're welcome, Jamie. It was my pleasure to join you in this conversation. Cool. Thanks.
That was my interview with Niels Tanis about the security risks of including third-party code in your applications. Be sure to check the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/subscribe for ways to do that, and to come back next time for more .NET Core goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software Ltd.